The founder's son called my trucking routes a mess a child could fix. Those routes took me 19 years and 800 handshakes to build. He didn't even look up when he said it. Ian Waverly, 29 years old, sitting at the head of a conference table that wasn't his 6 months ago, typing something on his MacBook Pro while he decided the shape of my future. Sandra Brooks stood behind him, holding a manila folder, eyes fixed on the carpet like it owed her money. The routing infrastructure you've built is, frankly, analog, Ian said. Still typing. We're moving to a scalable, data-driven model. OptiHall eliminates the friction points your system depends on. Personal relationships don't scale, Edmund. They never did. I stood at the other end of the table. I didn't sit. My hands were flat on the mahogany, fingers spread. Still. Sandra's eyes flicked up once, then back to the carpet. But here's what Ian Waverly didn't know about handshakes. My name is Edmund James Coulter. I'm 51 years old. I spent 13 years in the United States Marine Corps, enlisted at 19, separated as a captain. 03, motor transport officer. 3 deployments. I planned convoy routes through contested territory where a wrong turn didn't mean a late delivery. It meant people didn't come home. I negotiated fuel and maintenance contracts with local operators in environments where the word optimization would get you laughed out of the room, and the word trust was the only currency that moved weight from point A to point B. 6 months after I separated from the Corps, I walked into Waverly Freight Lines and shook hands with Diana Waverly. She had 14 trucks and a dispatch office that smelled like old coffee and copier ink. I started as a regional route coordinator. I was 32. 19 years later, I was vice president of logistics. I'd built the distribution network that made Waverly Freight Lines what it was. 43 hub partnerships across 22 states. Every single one of them built the same way. Face to face. Name to name. Handshake to handshake. The fuel stop in Amarillo. Bobby Tillman. I met him at a marine logistics conference in 2003, before I'd been at Waverly a full year. He ran an independent fuel depot off I-40 West that every major carrier in the Southwest needed access to. Corporate guys from the big outfits would send him rate proposals by fax. Bobby threw them in the trash. I drove out there on a Saturday, bought him lunch at a diner across the highway, and we talked for 3 hours about diesel allocation during the Iraq drawdown. He gave Waverly preferred fueling rates the following Monday. He's given us preferred rates every year since. Not because of a contract, because of a conversation. The dock manager in Memphis, Pete Garrison. During the Teamsters dispute in 2014, every carrier on the I-55 corridor lost their priority loading slots. Docks were backed up 9-10 hours. I called Pete at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Not from my office. From my kitchen table, Margaret asleep in the next room, already 2 years into treatment. Pete held our slots. He held them because I'd driven to Memphis personally during a flood in 2011 when every other logistics VP sent an email. He remembered that. Margaret Ann Coulter. She died of ovarian cancer 6 years ago. I drove her to 3 of her final 6 chemotherapy appointments. I missed the other 3 because I was in Ohio negotiating hub agreements that kept Waverly's Midwest corridor alive through a capacity crisis. I don't dramatize that. I state it the way you state a fact that doesn't change no matter how many times you turn it over in your head. I was in Ohio. She was in a hospital chair. My son Daniel sat with her for the ones I missed. He was 16. Daniel's high school graduation. I wasn't there. I was at a weigh station outside Knoxville managing a refrigeration breakdown on a Greenfield grocery shipment. 42,000 pounds of perishable products sitting on the shoulder of I-75 in June. I called him from the cab of a backup rig. He said it was fine. He's 22 now. Final semester at University of Tennessee. Logistics management. He calls me every Sunday night. He's never once said it was fine again, and I've never once asked him to. That's who I was at Waverly. The man who missed things that mattered. So the things that mattered to Waverly never missed. 3 months before I was fired, Diana Waverly called me into her office. She had the door closed. The framed copy of my original hire letter was still on the wall behind her desk, right where it had been for 19 years. She told me her son Ian was being appointed Chief Operations Officer. There was no internal candidate review, no posted position, no search committee. The board allies Diana had cultivated over the last 2 years pushed the vote through under the banner of Next Generation Leadership. Ian Douglas Waverly, 29 years old. Northwestern Kellogg, MBA, graduated 2 years prior. His operational experience, 14 months at a freight tech startup called Loader. Loader is defunct now. It lasted less time than a lease on a mid-tier sedan. Diana didn't look me in the eye when she said it. She looked at the hire letter on the wall. I need you to stay on, Edmund. We're restructuring. There's a consulting adjacent role we'd like you to transition into. Consulting adjacent. I let that phrase sit in the air between us like a bad smell. I understand, I said. I stayed. I watched. That evening, I called Frank Davis. Frank Curtis Davis, Captain USMC, retired. We served together. Same cohort. He's a senior partner now at Davis & Reed Law Group in Nashville. Employment contracts, non-compete enforceability, talent mobility. He'd reviewed my original employment agreement 19 years ago when I signed it. He'd flagged the non-solicitation clause language back then, said it was broad, said to keep a copy. Frank pulled the file that night. He'd held my original employment paperwork for 19 years. The non-solicitation clause is overreach, Frank said. Tennessee courts don't look kindly on non-solicitation clauses this broad. Client relationships you built before the company existed, using your own military contacts, that's not their property. Tennessee Code. Annotated Section 47-50-112. Your offer letter contains no language assigning your pre-existing military logistics contacts to Waverly's ownership. Edmund, these relationships are yours. They always were. I didn't do anything with that information. Not yet. I wrote it down in a leather-bound notebook I've kept since my first deployment. 43 hubs, 22 states, 800 contacts, personal notes, direct phone numbers, the informal terms that made Waverly's network run, priority loading windows, fuel credit arrangements, dock time guarantees during peak season. None of it was in Waverly's internal systems. None of it ever had been. I began updating my personal records. Quietly. I didn't accelerate. I didn't act. I simply confirmed what was always mine. 6 weeks before the firing, my phone buzzed at 7:14 p.m. I was home. Sitting in the living room, Margaret's reading chair still in the corner where it had been for 6 years, untouched. Rex was on the floor next to my feet. Roy Mitchell. Text message. Roy Allen Mitchell, senior dispatcher, my longest-serving direct report. 14 years at Waverly. He's 47 years old, and he has never once sent me a text message that wasn't worth reading. You might want to know what they're saying in that conference room. Doors cracked. I drove back to the building. Took 22 minutes. Parked in the lower garage. Took the stairs to 3. The hallway outside the third-floor conference room was empty. The door was cracked open, about 4 inches. Hallway carried sound better than people realized. Ian's voice. Ian's. Coulter won't push back. He's 51. He's got a kid in college. He needs the paycheck. He'll adapt, or he'll leave quietly. Either way, the transition is clean. We roll out OptiHall. We cut the dependency on his personal network, and we modernize the stack. 6 months from now, nobody remembers how the old system worked. Someone murmured agreement. I couldn't tell who. I stood in that hallway for 40 seconds, listening to a 29-year-old man with 14 months of operational experience explain to a room why I was irrelevant. Roy was inside. He did not look at the door. I walked back to my car. That was Tuesday, 6 weeks before the end. And Ian Waverly was right about one thing. I didn't push back. The firing came on a Tuesday, 2:15 p.m., conference room, second floor. Ian was at the head of the table again. Sandra Brooks behind him again. Same manila folder. Same eyes on the floor. We're restructuring the logistics division under OptiHall's operational framework, Ian said. He was using his boardroom voice, the one he practiced. Your role as vice president of logistics has been eliminated. This isn't personal, Edmund. It's about the company's future. We need agile infrastructure, not legacy systems built on individual dependencies. He slid the termination package across the table. Sandra opened the folder, placed the documents in front of me. Her hands were steady, but she was breathing through her mouth. She never looked up. I read every page, every clause, every line. Ian watched me read. He adjusted his cufflinks twice. I signed where indicated. Then I reached into my jacket and picked up my silver pen. Diana Waverly had given it to me the day I closed the Greenfield grocery contract 6 years ago. $94 million, the largest account in Waverly's history. She had it engraved, EJC, for the one who builds what lasts. I placed the pen in my shirt pocket. I want to do this right, I said. Ian nodded. He looked relieved, like a man who'd expected a fight and gotten a handshake instead. I shook no hands. I picked up my copy of the termination documents. I walked out of the conference room, down the hall, through the lobby, and into the parking garage. It was raining, the kind of steady mid-afternoon rain that turns a windshield into something you stare through without seeing. I sat in my truck for 11 minutes. Rex wasn't with me. The garage was quiet. Just the rain, the concrete, and the sound of my own breathing. Then I picked up my phone and called Frank Davis. It's done, I said. Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. Involuntary termination without cause. Frank was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, I'll pull the file tonight. We'll go through everything. Every clause. Every contact. Every relationship that predates that employment agreement. I know, I said. Edmund. Yeah. They have no idea what they just did. I sat there a moment longer. Rain on the windshield. The silver pen in my pocket, still warm from my hand. No, I said. They don't. If you've ever had a boss who thought your relationships were just part of the furniture, hit that like button and subscribe. That Tuesday evening, 6:40 p.m., Frank Davis and I sat across from each other at his office on 4th Avenue in Nashville. He had my original employment agreement spread across his desk. 19 years of paper. The non-solicitation clause was on page 11, paragraph 8C. Frank read it aloud once. Then he read it again. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands behind his head. Edmund, this clause attempts to restrict you from contacting clients you personally introduced to Waverly. Clients who predate your employment contract's non-solicit language. Clients you brought in through military contacts and personal relationships you held before Waverly existed. He tapped the page. Tennessee Code annotated section 47-50-112. Tennessee courts have consistently refused to enforce non-solicitation clauses that overreach against employee-originated relationships. Your original offer letter contains no language assigning your pre-existing military logistics contacts to Waverly's ownership. He closed the folder. These relationships are yours. They always were. And as of 2:15 p.m. today, you are no longer bound by any obligation to pretend otherwise. I said nothing for a moment. I looked at the folder. 19 years of my life, reduced to a stack of paper that a 29-year-old with veneers had decided was worth less than an algorithm. What's my timeline? I asked. Legally, you're clean right now. The termination was involuntary, without cause. The clause is unenforceable. But Edmund. Frank leaned forward. Don't rush. Don't call anyone tonight. Don't call anyone this week. Let them launch their platform. Let the system show exactly what it can and can't do without you. Then move. I understood what he was telling me. The same thing any good officer knows. You don't engage until the terrain favors you. I know, I said. Frank pulled a bourbon bottle from his desk drawer, poured 2 glasses, 3 fingers each. Not the daily drinker, the good stuff. Semper Fi, Edmund. Semper Fi. I drove home. Rex met me at the door. He knew something had shifted. Dogs know. He didn't bring his ball. He just leaned against my leg and stayed there while I stood in the kitchen. Margaret's reading chair visible through the doorway. The house quiet in the way it had been quiet for 6 years. I didn't make a single phone call that night. I didn't make one the next day, or the day after that. I waited. 3 days after my termination, OptiHaul went live at Waverly Freight Lines. Ian Waverly's LinkedIn post appeared at 9:47 a.m. on day 4. I know the exact time because Roy Mitchell screenshotted it and texted it to me without comment. Just the image. No words necessary. Excited to announce the full rollout of OptiHaul at Waverly Freight Lines. Tough decisions, new direction, next chapter. Logistics is being reimagined. Hashtag digital transformation. Hashtag agile logistics. Hashtag next-gen leadership asterisk. 4 people liked it. Roy Mitchell was not one of them. On day 3, Ian held a company-wide meeting in the main conference room. Roy was there. He told me about it that evening in a text that read like a field report. Ian stood at the front of the room, slides behind him, OptiHaul branding on every screen. He used the word agile 4 times. He told the room, "We've removed legacy friction points from the routing architecture. The old system was built on personal relationships that don't scale. We're building something that doesn't depend on any one person." He said, "Any one person," and looked at the empty chair where I used to sit during operations meetings. Roy said the room was quiet. Not the quiet of agreement. The quiet of people who know what's coming and have decided not to be the one who says it. I wasn't there to hear any of it. I was at a diner on Murfreesboro Road, drinking black coffee in a vinyl booth with cracked red upholstery, reading a laminated menu I had no intention of ordering from. The waitress refilled my cup twice without asking. She was maybe 65. Name tag said Dolores. She didn't ask me why I was sitting alone in a diner at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, looking like a man with nowhere particular to be. I liked that about her. Here's what Ian Waverly didn't understand about OptiHaul, or about logistics, or about the real world outside of a Kellogg school case study. The algorithm was built on data. The data assumed that Waverly's hub relationships were standardized commercial agreements, contracted rates, published loading schedules, formal fuel pricing, the kind of infrastructure you could feed into a system and have it optimize. But those agreements weren't standardized. They weren't contracted. They weren't published. Bobby Tillman in Amarillo didn't give Waverly preferred fueling rates because of a contract. He gave them preferred rates because I'd sat with him at a diner 20 years ago and talked about diesel allocation during the Iraq drawdown. His rate for Waverly was 4 cents below market. The OptiHaul system didn't know that rate existed because that rate had never been written down anywhere except in my leather-bound notebook and in Bobby Tillman's memory. When OptiHaul's routing engine sent a Waverly truck to Bobby's depot with a standard fuel request at published market rates, Bobby processed it at published market rates. Why wouldn't he? The man who'd earned the discount was gone. Pete Garrison in Memphis didn't hold priority loading windows for Waverly because of a dock time agreement filed in any system. He held them because I'd driven to Memphis during a flood when every other VP sent an email. OptiHaul's scheduling algorithm requested standard queue placement at Pete's dock. Pete gave Waverly standard queue placement. 9-hour wait, same as everyone else. 43 hubs, 22 states. Every single one of them operated on the same principle. Personal trust, personal history, personal relationships that a 29-year-old with a MacBook Pro had called friction points. The friction points were the only thing holding the network together. Day 9 post-launch. The first missed Greenfield grocery delivery. Greenfield Grocery Group, $94 million. Waverly's anchor client, perishable goods, refrigerated transport, time sensitive to the hour. The kind of contract where a late delivery doesn't mean an apology email. It means spoiled produce on a loading dock and a regional purchasing director who starts returning calls from your competitors. The first shipment missed its window by 6 hours. A refrigeration unit sat in standard queue at the Memphis dock because Pete Garrison's priority loading slots were no longer being held for Waverly trucks. The produce arrived warm, not ruined, but late. And in perishable logistics, late is the first step toward ruined. Ian called it a calibration issue. Day 12. Second missed Greenfield shipment. This time, the routing algorithm sent a truck through Amarillo on a fuel stop that used to cost Waverly 4 cents below market. Bobby Tillman processed it at full rate. The margin impact cascaded through the delivery schedule. The truck arrived 11 hours late. Product was borderline. Greenfield's regional purchasing director sent a one-line email. We need to discuss service levels. Ian told the operations team to trust the algorithm. He said the system was self-correcting and that early-stage variance is expected in any digital transformation. Roy texted me that night. It's getting bad. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, because there was nothing to say yet. The terrain wasn't ready. Day 14. Roy reached out to Pete Garrison in Memphis on his own. Off the record. Just a phone call between two men who'd worked the same corridor for a decade. Pete said, I gave the OptiHaul system the same treatment I'd give any unknown carrier. Standard queue. No preferential windows. Roy, I don't know who's running things over there now, but nobody's called me. Nobody's come down here. Edmund used to call me every 2 weeks just to check in. I haven't heard from Waverly since he left. The hub relationships had gone cold. Not because anyone was sabotaging Waverly. Not because the dock managers were punishing the company. They simply did what any independent business does when the personal relationship disappears. They treated Waverly like a stranger, because without Edmund Coulter, Waverly was a stranger. Day 16. Greenfield Grocery Group canceled their $94 million contract. 3 missed perishable shipments. In a row. The regional purchasing director sent a 2-paragraph email. No phone call, no meeting, no negotiation. 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph was 1 sentence. We wish Waverly Freight Lines well in its digital transformation. Roy forwarded me the email. He added 1 word. Done. Day 11 after my termination. 3 days before the Greenfield cancellation. I drove to a hotel conference room off I-40 in Nashville. Warren Clark was already there, CEO of Consolidated Ridge Transport, 61 years old. Built his company the same way Diana built hers, truck by truck, route by route. He was drinking black coffee from a ceramic mug. No laptop, no slides, no branding deck. I brought a single manila folder. Inside, a list of 43 hub contacts, my terms, and a proposed client transition approach. I set it on the table between us. Warren opened it. Read every page. Slowly. The way a man reads when he understands exactly what he's looking at. He looked up. I said nothing. Warren Clark said, "When can you start?" I signed as Chief Operations Officer of Consolidated Ridge Transport at 3:18 p.m. I used Diana's silver pen. The engraving caught the light from the conference room window. EJC, for the one who builds what lasts. I tucked the pen back into my pocket. At 3:45 p.m., Frank Davis filed the formal notice to Waverly's legal counsel. Edmund James Coulter was no longer bound by any non-solicitation provisions, citing Tennessee Code Annotated Section 47-50-112, and a detailed brief on the clause's unenforceability. The clock started. Day 19, post-launch. Diana Waverly removed her son from the company. I know what that meeting looked like because Roy told me. Not in detail. He didn't need to. He said Diana walked into Ian's office at 8:15 a.m. She closed the door. She was inside for 7 minutes. When she came out, her face was the color of concrete. Ian came out 4 minutes later. He was carrying a box. His cufflinks caught the light as he walked through the lobby. Nobody looked at him, not out of cruelty, out of the specific kind of discomfort that comes from watching someone discover that a title and a corner office were never the same thing as authority. His LinkedIn post celebrating OptiHall was still live. Posted on day 4. Still 4 likes. I didn't watch him leave. I was at home. Rex was on the floor next to my chair. Daniel had called the night before. Sunday, right on schedule. He'd asked me how I was doing. I told him I was fine. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You seem different this week. Less stressed. Like you're actually here when you're here." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said, "I'm working on it." Day 22. I began making calls, not to Waverly, to the clients I'd served for 19 years, the ones whose shipments I'd saved from way stations and flooded docks and refrigeration failures, the ones who'd watched their delivery windows collapse in the 2 weeks since OptiHall went live, the ones whose purchasing directors had already started asking, quietly, where Edmund Coulter had gone. I didn't rush. I called one at a time, the way you build anything that's meant to last, one by one. By the end of 6 weeks, 11 of Waverly's top 15 clients had signed with Consolidated Ridge Transport. Quietly, no press release, no LinkedIn announcement, just contracts, signed, filed, and operational. 47% of Waverly's annual volume, gone. Not because I stole anything, not because I made a single promise I couldn't keep, because clients follow the man they trust. They always have. On the evening it was done, the evening the last of the 11 contracts was signed, my phone rang. Waverly Freight Lines, main office number. I looked at the screen for 4 seconds. Rex lifted his head from the floor and watched me. I pressed decline. Click. I poured 3 fingers of bourbon that night. Not the daily drinker. The good stuff. The bottle Margaret had given me the Christmas before her diagnosis. I'd been saving it for something, though I'd never been able to say what. I sat in the kitchen with the glass on the table and Rex at my feet and the house quiet around me in that way I'd stopped fighting years ago. The phone rang again. Same number. Waverly Freight Lines, main office. I let it ring. Rex looked at me. I looked at the bourbon. It rang 6 more times that evening. I didn't count. Roy counted. He texted me at 9:14 p.m. "Diana's been trying to reach you. Legal team's been in the conference room since 3. Ian's gone. She knows about Consolidated Ridge. She knows about the clients. She knows about all of it." I read the text. I set the phone face down on the table. I took a sip of bourbon. It was smooth, warm. Margaret had good taste. She always had good taste. In whiskey, in books, in the reading chair that still sat in the corner of the living room, with the lamp she'd picked out still angled the way she'd left it. I could see it from where I sat. I could always see it from where I sat. I didn't call Diana back that night. I didn't call her back the next morning. I didn't call her back for 9 days. On the 10th day, a certified letter arrived at my home. Return receipt requested. Waverly Freight Lines corporate letterhead. I signed for it at the door while Rex sat behind me on the porch, watching the mailman walk back to his truck like he'd delivered something heavier than paper. I opened it at the kitchen table. Diana Waverly's handwriting, not typed, handwritten on corporate stationery. 2 pages. The letter began, Edmund, I owe you more than a letter. She wrote about the Greenfield contract. She wrote about the 47% volume loss. She wrote about the board meeting that had taken place the previous Thursday, where the remaining directors had reviewed the full scope of the operational collapse and voted to restructure leadership. She wrote that Ian had been removed from all operational authority and that his COO title had been formally dissolved by board resolution. She wrote that Waverly's general counsel, a man named Gerald Holt, had reviewed Frank Davis's legal brief on my non-solicitation clause and confirmed, in Gerald's words, that the clause was unenforceable as written and should never have been included in the original agreement. She wrote that she was sorry. She asked if I would consider a meeting, not to come back. 2. She said she understood that door was closed. She said she wanted to discuss a co-routing partnership between Waverly and Consolidated Ridge, a way to stabilize what was left of her network using the hub relationships that had always been mine. I read the letter twice. I folded it and placed it in my leather-bound notebook, between the page for Pete Garrison in Memphis and the page for Bobby Tillman in Amarillo. Then I called Warren Clark. Diana Waverly wants a meeting, I said. Warren was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I want to do this right. Warren Clark didn't say anything for 3 seconds. Then, that's why I hired you. The meeting took place on a Wednesday, 10 a.m., Waverly Freight Line's headquarters, the same building I'd walked out of 31 days earlier in the rain. I parked in the lower garage, same spot. The concrete still had the oil stain from the truck I'd driven for 19 years. I wore a navy suit, no tie, Diana's silver pen in my shirt pocket, a single manila folder under my arm. Inside, Consolidated Ridge's proposed co-routing terms, a hub-by-hub operational framework, and a client service agreement that would allow Waverly to access 8 of the 43 distribution hubs through Consolidated Ridge's network. On my terms. At my rates. I walked through the lobby. The receptionist, Karen Webb, looked up from her desk. She'd been at Waverly for 11 years. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once. The kind of nod that carries more weight than a standing ovation. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. The boardroom, polished mahogany table, 20 feet long, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the freight yard where I'd spent 19 years watching trucks move in patterns I'd designed. 8 leather chairs, 6 of them occupied. Diana Waverly sat at the head of the table, silver hair, reading glasses on, hard copies spread in front of her. Gerald Holt, general counsel, sat to her left with a legal pad and the expression of a man who'd spent the last 3 weeks discovering exactly how many things he should have reviewed before Ian Waverly touched anything. 2 board members I recognized. Roy Mitchell was in the corner, standing, arms crossed. He'd been asked to attend as operational liaison. He looked at me when I walked in, and his jaw tightened, and he gave me the smallest nod a human being can give, while still meaning everything by it. 1 chair was empty, the one at the far end of the table, directly across from Diana. A printed nameplate sat in front of it. Edmund J. Coulter, Consolidated Ridge Transport COO. Someone had typed it that morning. The ink was fresh. I sat down. Diana looked at me across 20 feet of polished mahogany. Edmund, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were flat on the table, the same way mine had been flat on the table 31 days ago, in the conference room 1 floor below, when her son told me personal relationships don't scale. Thank you for coming. Diana, I said. Gerald Holt cleared his throat. Mr. Coulter, I want to acknowledge on the record that the non-solicitation clause in your original employment agreement was reviewed by our office and found to be unenforceable under Tennessee Code. Annotated Section 47-50-112. Waverly Freight Lines has no legal claim to the client relationships or hub partnerships you developed during or prior to your tenure. We formally withdraw any implied restriction on your professional activities. He said it like he was reading a eulogy for his own credibility. I appreciate that, Gerald, I said. Diana leaned forward. I'm not going to pretend this meeting is between equals, Edmund. It's not. You built the network. We let my son dismantle it. I let my son dismantle it. I let family cloud my business judgment. And 47% of our annual volume walked out the door because of it. The room was silent. The kind of silent that happens when everyone present knows the next words matter more than anything said in the previous hour. I'm not here to renegotiate the past, I said. I placed the manila folder on the table and slid it toward her. I'm here to offer a co-routing framework. 8 of the 43 hubs accessed through Consolidated Ridge, shared dock time windows during peak season, standardized fuel credit pass-throughs at 3 of the Southwest Corridor depots. The terms are in the folder. Diana opened it. She read the first page, then the second. Gerald leaned over to read with her. His eyebrows went up once, then again. These terms are generous, Diana said quietly. They're fair, I said. There's a difference. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice didn't break. Diana Waverly had built a company from 3 trucks and a telephone. She didn't break in boardrooms. She broke later, alone, the way people who build things always do. The board voted last Thursday, she said. Unanimous. 7-0. Ian's appointment has been formally reversed. His operational decisions from the past 60 days are under full review. The OptiHall platform has been suspended, pending an independent operational audit. 7-0. I let that number sit in the air. Gerald, Diana said, read the resolution. Gerald Holt picked up a single sheet of paper. His hands were not steady. Board Resolution 2024-09. Effective immediately, the Waverly Freight Lines Board of Directors acknowledges that the involuntary termination of Edmund James Coulter, Vice President of Logistics, was executed without proper board review, without operational impact assessment, and in violation of the company's internal succession protocols. The board formally rescinds the termination decision and extends its recognition of Mr. Coulter's 19 years of exemplary service. The board further acknowledges that the non-solicitation clause in Mr. Coulter's employment agreement was unenforceable and should not have been presented as binding. Gerald set the paper down. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The resolution was a formality. The real verdict had been delivered by 11 contracts signed on Consolidated Ridge letterhead and a $94 million anchor client that wasn't coming back. Diana signed the co-routing agreement at 10:47 a.m. She used her own pen, a black Mont Blanc, practical. No engraving. I signed with the silver pen she'd given me 6 years ago. EJ, C, for the one who builds what lasts. When it was done, Diana stood. She extended her hand across the table. I shook it. One handshake. After 800. Roy walked me to the elevator. We didn't speak until the doors opened. Then he said, "No one here has forgotten you. Not now. Not ever." "I know," I said. "Holy shit, Edmund." I almost smiled. "Yeah?" I drove home. The sun was out. First time in weeks it hadn't been raining. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment with the windows down, listening to nothing in particular. The neighborhood was quiet. Somebody's sprinkler was running 2 houses down. A cardinal sat on the mailbox post. Rex was barking inside, the way he barks when he hears my truck, and doesn't understand why I'm not already through the door. I went inside. Rex hit me at the knees. I knelt down and let him press his head into my chest, tail going, the whole back half of him moving with it. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, sat at the kitchen table. Margaret's chair was in the corner. The lamp was angled the way she'd left it. The house was quiet, but it was a different quiet now. Not the quiet of absence, the quiet of a man who'd stopped running from the silence and decided to sit with it. That Sunday night, Daniel called, right on schedule. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, how was your week?" I looked at the bourbon, at Rex on the floor, at the silver pen on the table next to my leather-bound notebook, The one with 43 hubs and 22 states and 800 names written in my own hand. It was good, I said. It was a good week. You sound different. Different how? I don't know. Like you're actually sitting down when you're sitting down. You know what I mean? I did know what he meant. For 19 years, I'd been standing in rooms, standing in hallways, standing at way stations and loading docks and conference tables where other men decided my future, while I held the whole thing together with nothing but my word and my presence. I'd been standing so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to sit. Are you going to come to my graduation? Daniel asked. The real one? In May. The ceremony. I closed my eyes. His high school graduation. The way station outside Knoxville. 42,000 pounds of perishable product. The phone call from the cab of a backup rig. It's fine, Dad. He was 16. He never said it was fine again. I'll be there, I said. Front row. You don't have to be front row. For me, it is. He was quiet for a second. Then, okay, Dad. Okay. After we hung up, I sat for a long time. Rex was asleep. The bourbon was almost gone. The city was doing what cities do on Sunday nights, settling in, winding down, the distant sound of trucks on the interstate carrying freight through corridors I'd built with my own hands and my own name and my own time. Ian Waverly's LinkedIn profile was updated the following week. Roy sent me the screenshot. The Opti Hall post was deleted. His title now read, Exploring New Opportunities. No location listed. No endorsements. The 4 likes were gone. I didn't look at it long. Sometimes the most valuable thing a man builds can't be uploaded to a platform or optimized by an algorithm or handed to a 29-year-old in a corner office who thinks leadership is a title you inherit. Sometimes it's just a name, spoken by the right person, at the right loading dock, at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, when every other carrier sent an email. Sometimes the thing that holds an empire together isn't a system. It's a handshake. And you don't get to keep what you never understood was holding you up. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.